It has always been in the Russian psyche to destabilize a foreign power through violence.
Yes.
And the United States, they figured out, we'll do violence against ourselves. All we need to do is manipulate your mindset.
Hello, and welcome to this week's special U.S. election episode of On the Edge. And this week's going to be slightly different because I am traveling. I'm back in the States to participate in American democracy. As such, we are recording in a guest studio. But it's also slightly different because we are going to be talking about current affairs, something that is in the news now. We're going to keep the comprehensive nature and the in-depth discussion, but this is something that is happening as we speak because this is the last episode before this crucial election. And so I wanted to present to you how this event, this vote, this choice that Americans are making is essential, and you need to think about these things when you go to the ballot box if you're an American citizen. Now, I can think of no better person to discuss all of these topics with than Malcolm Nance. Malcolm is a former U.S. Navy intelligence officer. He is the author of numerous best-selling books on the New York Times list. He was a former member of the Ukrainian International Legion, which means he was on the ground in Ukraine fighting Russians and can discuss things from that perspective. He is currently out on the stump supporting Harris because he understands that this common fight against autocracy that Ukrainians are fighting against Putin is applicable here when we look at the threat from Donald Trump. I hope that you will find this an enlightening and informative episode, but more importantly, I hope you will consider it if you're an American voter when you go into that booth. So, Malcolm, thanks for coming and doing this and taking the time. I know you're very busy as we get to the election. Let me get to the first question, which I think is at the core of what we want to be talking about here today, right. And that is this. When Americans go to the ballot box, on Tuesday. Why is it that they should be considering Ukraine as they cast their vote?
Right. Yeah, it's an excellent question. And when I went to the ballot box last week here in New York, it was foremost on my mind as well. We're not just casting a ballot for the critical issues that face the United States, foremost of which is that we are literally making a choice between retaining American democracy as it exists for the last 248 years, or choosing a dictatorship. And that dictatorship is backed, supported, and appears to have the love of Vladimir Putin, the dictator of Russia.
Yeah.
Ukraine, and the reason I went to Ukraine to fight, is the front line of democracy for the Western world now. It is literally physically fighting a dictatorial regime that sought to invade it, take it over in a short period of time. Moscow needs Ukraine. It'll hold 1/4 of the world's grain. Mm-hmm. If it takes that country, all of the advanced technology that helped build the Soviet Union, but most importantly, it will recreate the Iron Curtain against NATO, which is led by now on the border with Poland and the Baltic states, and it would allow Russia to feel emboldened to take whatever they want using threats. They support Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Donald Trump supports Moscow.
Yeah.
If we lose this election and Donald Trump becomes president through hook or crook, he could, in fact, withdraw all American support from Ukraine, and worse, could actually order the U.S. Armed Forces and intelligence community to support Moscow. And of course, that would lead to a major cataclysm.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because we are given a choice of two.
Right.
We
It's very
either-
binary.
It's very binary. What would a second Donald J. Trump administration look like for Ukraine, for the transatlantic relationship in NATO you mentioned?
Yeah.
I mean, what do you envision a second Trump administration?
Mayhem. I mean, it would be mayhem. It would literally be like saying everything we sacrificed since the day we landed in Normandy in 1944 to fight fascism is getting thrown out, and that the American people now support open fascism, support oligarchy, support dictatorship, and that the American way of maintaining global stability through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Atlantic Alliance,
Which has sustained peace on the continent.
for 80 plus years, almost, 80 years. And we don't want it. And then what we want is we want economic chaos. Donald Trump coming into the presidency would throw the world into chaos. But what it would signal is the end of America as the global beacon in the defense of democracy. It means America would openly accept autocracy and dictatorship, and that it would show the world that democracy is on its way out because the biggest power has been overthrown. So for people who are going into that ballot box, you're not voting for a man or woman. You are voting for the entire system as it's existed since the day George Washington was elected president. You are deciding whether you want to end that, and that you want to end America's support for democracy around the world. And Ukraine is just a symptom of that.
Yeah, and I mean, not only obviously we fixate here on Ukraine, Russia,
Sure.
and anything that kind of gravitates around that. But when we talk about NATO, Trump has repeatedly cast aspersions against NATO. That system, which has existed for so long and kept that peace, how in danger do you think it would be if Trump gets back?
Well, he wasn't just casting aspersions. Let me talk about some of the famous cases. The first time he met Jens Stoltenberg, the former, former director of NATO, he thought NATO was a trading partnership. He had no clue that NATO was a defense alliance. And he kept saying to him, people need to pay their fees. And Stoltenberg said, this is not a country club. And he goes, well, how are we supposed to get more trade? How are we supposed to get, and he goes, this is a defense alliance. We are here aligned against Russia. And Trump was not only stumped by that, he wanted to know why we were aligned against Russia. It's clueless. And now we know that he had business with Russia under the table. He was trying to build Trump Towers Moscow. He thought Vladimir Putin was like his mentor.
Yeah.
So that was one. Another was the meeting he had with the Prime Minister of Sweden in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And the Prime Minister of Sweden, had to explain to him that Sweden was not at that time a member of NATO. And Trump said, we work with NATO, we train with NATO, but we are not in NATO. And Trump said, that's what I want the United States to do. He wanted to withdraw the United States from NATO, smash the alliance, because his entire worldview was built for him in 2014 by Vladimir Putin and the top 15 oligarchs he met at the Miss Universe pageant.
This is another question. And one of the first things that drew my attention to you was you seeing the same thing that I was seeing in 2016.
Right.
The number of Russians in Trump's sphere. How compromised do you really think Donald J. Trump is by the Kremlin?
Well, I've said this on air when I was on MSNBC numerous times over the 7 years that I was there, and certainly since 2016, I was the first news media person to actually go on air,
right,
and say, but I was an intelligence analyst, right? I mean, that's different than being a reporter.
Well, that's why the alarms went off. I mean, this guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
I've been watching them for 20, 30 years as well, and I could see the playbook in 2016 and was screaming from, of course, I'm behind the camera normally at that time, you were on camera.
Right. And
so I saw it and I said, this guy, I got
as I say
on
on television, I'm not a journalist, I'm a spy that talks on television. And so when I said the United States is under attack in an operation by Russian intelligence in order to elect Donald Trump president, people were like, whoa, that couldn't possibly be true. And then the next day, he comes on air and he goes, Russia, if you're listening, please release 30,000 Hillary Clinton emails, almost if he had said, oh, Malcolm needs backup in his analysis. So the reason that I mention this is that my writing, I've written 4 books about Donald Trump and his relationship with Russia. Mm-hmm. And the most profound was a book called The Plot to Destroy Democracy, right. How Putin and his spies were undermining America and dismantling the West. Mm-hmm. True. On 100%. Every level now. Now the Mueller report validated it, everything. But some of the things that I learned in that book, in my next book, The Plot to Betray America, was that in 1977 was the first time Donald Trump came up on the radar of what then was known as the KGB. Mm-hmm. In 1977, he married a Czech citizen, a citizen of now the Czech Republic. At that time, it was called the Czechoslovakia, the People's Republic of Czechoslovakia or something along that line. And their intelligence agency, the STB, were the subordinate intelligence collectors for the KGB behind the Iron Curtain in the Czech Republic. The STB in 1977 started surveilling Ivana Trump and her family in the Czech Republic. They listened to all the phone calls. They opened all of their mail. When she came and brought her 3 children, Donald Jr., Eric, and Ivanka, to the Czech Republic, they monitored them when they were at play school and summer camp and all of that. So from 1977, he was under surveillance. Now, why do you collect that information? He's a millionaire, he's very flamboyant, real estate guy. The KGB collects people just to have you on the rolls, to see where are your vulnerabilities, where can you be useful, where could you be a useful idiot? By the time 1988 rolled around, they saw that Trump had been trying to gain the attention of the senior leadership in Russia because he wanted to do a housing project. Right. So when Mikhail Gorbachev was the big thing around the world, when he mentioned perestroika, Trump was so desperate to get his attention, he took out a full-page New York Times article saying he wanted to be appointed the negotiator for the strategic arms limitation talks, the SALT II treaties, which were supposed to disarm Europe. And he wanted to be appointed the negotiator because he was the big deal guy. And then he was so taken by Gorbachev and the power of someone coming from behind the Iron Curtain that when a fake Mikhail Gorbachev showed up at Trump Tower with his KGB bodyguard in an old Cadillac, Trump came down onto the street to meet this guy.
Mr. Trump is coming now.
This sounds laughable to us, but to the Russians, they were watching this.
Sure.
And they realized that by monitoring him, they were learning things the American public didn't know. That in 1987, he was trying to make a decision to run against George Herbert Walker Bush for president. And he was going to be like the American People's Party or the American Party or some, party that he was going to form. And the KGB knew about it because they had monitored Ivana's phone calls with her father. And here's the kicker. Czech intelligence, Czech STB, the reporting person for them to Czech intelligence and then to the KGB was her father. For over a decade, he had turned in everything because behind the Iron Curtain, you had to play, right? Now, how do we know all this? Because right now, 5 years ago, Czech television got all the physical records of all the surveillance of Donald Trump. So by 1988, there was an extensive KGB file on him, personality, money, family contacts, and then his whole wanting to get in the SALT talks, the fake Gorbachev. Then he traveled to Moscow in 1988, looking to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, and they knew this guy could be purchased.
Well, by monitoring him, I'm sure they were aware of all of his insecurities, of his
course.
psychological issues,
Now-
and all the rest of it. So then when you get a guy like Putin, who is a KGB agent skilled in manipulating
Human intelligence officer, a manipulator.
Right, a manipulator, and he has access to all of this information about all of Donald Trump's insecurities. I mean, it's clear to me that he is easily manipulable.
Absolutely.
And especially by a guy like Putin.
It was said that in 2012, when Mitt Romney lost, Donald Trump tweeted that there's no way Romney should have lost. He could have won. You know, we need to make America great again. And one of the people that DM'd him, direct messaged him on Twitter, which means you had to be following each other
Right.
and give each other permission, was a Russian oligarch who said, Donald, we are ready to support you if you ever run for president. 14 days later, Donald Trump registers Make America Great Again Political Action Committee. 2 years, fast forward to 2 years, he goes to the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. He is feted at the Nobu restaurant by the 12 richest men in Russia, including a representative of Vladimir Putin. And all he talked about was Trump Tower, Moscow. Now, at this point, Putin has been president for over a decade, and you know what he does. He's a skilled human intelligence officer. This guy's coming, and he goes, get me the KGB file on this guy, which probably had to be brought in on dollies because there's boxes of every letter, every phone call he made behind the Iron Curtain, old KGB files about this guy, psychological profiles, and Putin probably had to sort through it. And of course, worked with his people to do an analysis and say, what value is this man to me? He's trying to offer me, a guy, Vladimir Putin, a man who has maybe 200 billion secret dollars hidden away. He wants to offer me a penthouse at the top of Trump Tower, Moscow as a bribe. What can we do to use this person? And they started playing him. And as a matter of fact, many people that were there at the beginning of the campaign were people who worked for Russian intelligence, FSB. And so it was to answer
or
your
the criminal element, or the oligarchs.
right, or they're all in.
It's all the same thing.
They all work
That's
for
right.
Vladimir Putin,
At the end of the day.
So, but Trump started praising Putin effusively. When was the first big praise that Putin got from Donald Trump? Was not at Miss Universe. It was immediately after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014.
Right.
And when
Didn't
he
he
took
say it was a
Crimea,
genius move or
and
something?
he said, no, what he really said was, genius was recently. In 2014, he said, Vladimir Putin is showing he is a stronger, better president than Barack Obama by invading Ukraine. And at that point, KGB or the FSB with Putin as spy master has him on a hook. And he praised them effusively after that. Then they were encouraging him to run in 2015. And then a whole series of unfortunate
And he
events.
kind of hides behind, like, I did this, I increased sanctions. It's all window dressing as far as I'm concerned. When the rubber meets the road, he is pro-Putin. So
Very
American
pro-Moscow.
voters, as you go to the ballot box, a vote for Trump is a vote for Vladimir Putin. Now let's flip the coin.
Right.
Our other option is Harris, Ken
Kamala
Walz. And I want to ask you, if you were able to advise a Harris administration on what to do concerning the war in Ukraine and with Russia, what would your advice to that administration be?
Well, first, my first piece of advice was put me on the National Security Council staff.
Hear, hear.
I mean, we all love that there are career civilians there, that many of the senior staff are seconded colonels from the U.S. Army, some of which I met when I was in the Biden visited the Biden National Security Council staff at the old executive office building. But they have a lot of people who have no military experience. They have no true idea of what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. I was a combat veteran of the Ukrainian army. All right, I served in the Ukrainian forces almost 10 months, took part in the largest counteroffensive, the largest defeat of Russia since World War II, the Kharkiv counteroffensive in 2022. Engaged in direct combat with the Russians. I have been bombarded for days by the Russians, constant bombardment. That gives you a very interesting perspective. And these guys are like, oh, we have a lot of combat veterans here in the United States. No, you don't. Nothing like in Ukraine. People ask me, I said, look, I was in Iraq, I was in Afghanistan, I've been to all these places. Getting 3 or 4 rockets shot at you every day is nothing.
A couple mortar rounds
right
inside the green zone.
This is the Ardennes forest in France and Belgium in 1944. Mm-hmm. And you have a stand-up army in front of your face with stand-up tanks and artillery and mechanized infantry. Now these new elements, drones, battlefield ballistic missiles, hyperkinetic velocity missiles. And then you have another army that is standing up with the same weapon systems or better weapon systems, and you are clashing along a 1,000-kilometer line every day in infantry combat. In some instances, it's like World War I with trench lines, and other instances like in Kursk province, it's maneuver warfare, like Patton, in the Third Army trying to maneuver around the Nazis. That's the kind of war that's happening in Europe. And people have this misimpression because they're not hearing about it every day. All they see is when the Russians do air raids or bombard a civilian area. But there's 1,000 kilometers of constant active combat going with 2 the largest armies in Europe. So with that, the Harris administration, the advice I would give them is, number one, the belief in the Biden administration, particularly with Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, that don't get Russia mad, be incremental, don't use weapons that would allow this to escalate. There's no further escalation that can happen except chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. All right? Russia's not going to do that because everything wafts back into Russia. You would kill your own citizens.
And even them. The moment that they use a weapon of that nature,
NATO is in. NATO will declare a no-fly zone over Ukraine. They will say, hey, we have to bring in forces. Let's say you nuke Zaporizhia or someplace like that, or cause the power plant to melt down and create a Chernobyl. And how many reactors? Like 6 Chernobyls or something. Right. We would have to say, hey, largest humanitarian rescue in history is now going to be affected by NATO. Or the European Union. This air war is over.
And they know it. Putin knows it.
Right.
And so every time he rattles his nuclear weapon saber, that's all it is. It's a bluff.
I can't figure out why he's constantly rattling it at England. Like England is going to just, they have their own Trident ballistic missile submarines with 240 nuclear warheads per sub, and I think they have a fleet of 6 subs. So why would you do that? And I think it's in their head that they have some belief from I don't know, Kim Philby or, the Cambridge.
The 19th century Great Game where they were fighting over Afghanistan.
Right, and if you just.
And they're still.
You can scare Joe Bull, into backing away from the Americans. It's a bizarre strategy.
Well, they're fixated on the transatlantic Anglo-American alliance.
And breaking it.
If they can break it, they're convinced that they divide and conquer.
Oh, what are they afraid of? That we're going to send ships by Lend-Lease? Old 4-stack destroyer. This is not 1939, but they think that way geopolitically. Yeah. And they don't seem to understand the heart of NATO now is not Britain. It's Poland. Okay? Yeah. Poland is on the border. Poland is today what Germany was from 1948 until a few years ago. All U.S. forces were in Germany, and they're not anymore. I mean, you got Landstuhl Army Hospital, you have Grafenwehr Training Center, and you have not even Rhein-Main Air Base. You have you have the air base that we have out in Western Ramstein Air Base. I was just there a few months ago, and that's it. That's U.S. presence in Germany. It's not like when Elvis was there.
We're in Poland.
It's not like Romania. When Elvis and Jimi Hendrix was there and there were 200,000 U.S. soldiers there facing the Russians. They're in Poland now.
Well, it's interesting you bring this up because a lot of people who talk about what's happening in Ukraine are deathly afraid of this becoming World War III. To which my argument is, we learned in the last century that appeasement to a dictator like a Hitler or a Putin creates greater conflict. I mean, Trump keeps saying you elect Harris, you're going to get World War III. To which my response is, no, if you elect Trump, the war will not stop because Ukrainians cannot stop fighting because they're fighting for their existence.
Their existence. And
It will only turn into a protracted, maybe a guerrilla war or a...
No. They won't take any more terrain than they've generally taken now. But it'll go into a war where U.S. weapons and support will stop 100%.
But the Ukrainians won't stop fighting.
The Ukrainians can't stop fighting.
They can't stop
It
fighting.
will become a Europe-supported war.
Yes.
And so now Rheinmetall just opened...
And would contribute to that division, that transatlantic rift.
Right, of course. Well, the very election of Trump will do that.
Exactly.
It'll smash NATO. NATO will become a European alliance, where they will defend themselves. And they're now, over the last 4 years, they've seen the necessity of that because of the way the United States has toyed with
And God
fascism and
forbid,
dictatorship.
old man Trump shuffles off this moral coil or becomes...
And you get crazy J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance, who has openly said...
He will cut all ties to Ukraine.
That he will absolutely destroy the war effort in Ukraine. And also, when he was in the Munich Security Conference and had access to President Zelensky, he said, I already know everything I need to know.
Right.
Right. You don't want Trump, and you sure as hell don't want Vance.
This guy was a Marine Lance Corporal, all right? A Marine Corporal, public affairs officer that wrote a newsletter called The Eagle and Sand out in at a Marine Air Wing in Western Iraq. And it's like, you have no experience on an air base that's 27 miles long, that occasionally got a rocket fired at it. And he views himself as some military expert. Tim Waltz was a sergeant major in the Army for 24 years. He has managed people, weapons, equipment, and resources. And he understands what a war is. Then he was the governor of Wisconsin, ran the National Guard in emergencies and sending his troops overseas to fight in the Middle East.
He also made one city, I forget which city it was, but a sister city with Chernihiv in Ukraine, and has openly spoken about support. And Kamala has been to Kiev, I believe, 5 times, something like that. So
I spoke to Tim Waltz
more binary.
just the other day when I was with National Security Leaders for America, and we were doing our shtick in Wilmington, North Carolina.
On the stump.
Yes, on the stump. And then Tim Waltz came to meet our group, which was ex-admirals, generals, and a boatload of ambassadors. I mean, I've never been in a room with so many ambassadors except at a State Department luncheon, right? And I was one of the 3 senior enlisted that were there, and I got to meet Tim Waltz, and I said to him, I go, hey, I'm a Ukrainian Army Legionnaire. And he said, God bless you, we're never going to let our allies down. And I wish I had more than a few minutes to talk because we were talking about national security of the United States. But, how many black guy Ukrainian Army soldiers do you run into every day that
and
he knew me? He also knew me from MSNBC.
Well, sure. And also a guy who has put out so many books on this subject of Moscow's aggression against the United States and against democracy.
So I think it's important to have people on his staff, whoever the senior staff that are decision makers in the next National Security Council, understand that, when you say we're only going to send X amount of artillery shells or we can't afford to send X number of rockets, the strategy for Ukraine should be this: whatever we need to do shy of sending U.S. troops over, and so Ukraine gets total victory. I'm an advocate for air defense over 50% of Ukraine, no-fly zone over 50% of Ukraine. 50% of Ukraine doesn't get hit by Russia, but we have...
Well, God knows they need it in places along the river there, whether it's Kharkiv all the way down to Kherson.
Right.
Kherson, in particular, is being pelted by drones.
Right.
We need more air defense.
Also, I would surge air defense there. Look, Americans don't understand. We're not actually giving them money. We are giving them weapons. Look, Russia is getting their butts handed to them with...
So much so that they need to call on the DPRK.
Yeah, they need to call on North Korea, right? But getting their butts handed to them with 50-year-old American NATO weapons from the 1980s, like the Bradley fighting vehicle.
I love me a Bradley. I owe my life to a Bradley in City.
When you were under
fire. Those are, and the Ukrainians love them, and we got
it's a murder machine, and they love that vehicle. It'll be whatever's in inventory, whatever can be done to refurbish them, give them all to Ukraine. Anything that's coming out of inventory that's in the National Guard that is in excess, give them all. This is 1939, and we need to give Ukraine all the, like Britain, we need to give them all the resources they have.
Well, it's another binary choice. You go with Trump and Vance, you're going to see Ukraine being abandoned, and then Russia is on the border with Poland, and our military spending is going to go through the roof.
You were there. We were in Zhuzhov, right there, 25 minutes from the border, and the 82nd Airborne is stationed there.
Yeah.
Right?
U.S.
Right soldiers are right there on the Polish border, providing air defense at the Zhuzhov Airport.
Would go up. I mean, people are worried about, like, oh, why are we getting involved in these foreign wars, which I do want to touch on that subject in a second here. But when they talk about, like, oh, why are we involved? We're saving so much money. We're saving money ultimately.
Saving
first off,
hundreds of
as
millions.
You mentioned, we're not sending money. We're sending equipment, weapons. Put it in the right hands, the Ukrainians, and let them do the fighting.
And those weapons are replaced with brand spanking new,
so more
2024
more money in the economy.
to a U.S. factories. There is nothing. We are giving Ukraine artillery shells that are Vietnam War vintage.
And by contrast, if we don't, then we are looking at potentially a direct NATO-Russia conflict, which would be astronomically more expensive and more devastating. So again, it's totally binary as far as I'm concerned. While you might have to think it through a little bit, a Harris administration, I believe, will end the war.
I think they will.
Instead of
certainly, if I have anything to say.
Well, let's hope so.
I mean, I was at the DNC, and I was on with one of these Ukraine working groups, and I kept saying, "Hey, listen. Okay, this war could end. Ukraine could take back all its territory. It could become a member of NATO very quickly if you would just commit to their victory."
And this is why I get frustrated with people who say, tends to be in the Trump camp, but I hear it in a lot of areas. Why are we getting involved in another quote unquote forever war? Ukraine is not a forever war. It is imminently winnable.
It isn't even our war. Okay, the only Americans fighting there were with me in the International Legion. Okay, this is a war the United States is supporting an ally. Their men and women and children are dying, being attacked through terrorist attacks, through Russia's or drone attacks. They are fighting for their national existence. Yeah. So this is like the equivalent of saying, well, France hasn't been invaded by Nazi Germany. Why should we land at Normandy? It's not our war. It's our world, it's democracy, it's our ally. Yeah. And if you don't believe that America should never support any ally, then explain to me why we have a $500 billion defense budget. You don't keep these ships in the Pacific for fun, just surrender to China because it's not our war. If they invade South Korea or the Philippines or Japan or Taiwan.
And threaten our good ally Japan, or you gotta think 2 or 3 steps ahead.
They don't.
And they don't like children. They think like children, and it's when every problem is a nail and all you have is a hammer, that's where you end up. But it also is important, I think, to point out that if we abandon Ukraine, Ukraine is fighting. They're not only fighting for their sovereignty or their independence or their future or what, they're fighting for democracy. You've been in Ukraine. These guys actually do believe in the tenets of liberal democracy, Jeffersonian democracy.
Absolutely.
They want to emulate us because they've lived under Moscow's system and they've rejected it. So what message, Malcolm, does that send to the world that we say to a nation fighting for the very same values that we have, too difficult? No. Too expensive.
No.
Too dangerous.
No, what's happening now is the American population has been propagandized.
Yes.
And they have been led by, and strictly by Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone.
Yes.
Strictly by Donald
Trump. And his
Trump.
ilk and the GRU and the aquarium in Moscow.
This is the manipulation of one man. He has 30-some-odd% of the American public in his thrall. Yeah. All right? And they have cult-like behaviors where they believe whatever he says. If he flips on Ukraine tomorrow, they would all support Ukraine. But it'll never happen because he is now, he's beholden to an ex-KGB officer. And he loves it. It reminds me of what Prime Minister Paul Rudd Australia said about him that he was in the room with Putin and Trump looked at him with the admiration of a cheerleader, of the captain of the football team. And he viewed Putin as this manly, masculine character, and he was just literally in love with him. And Rudd was like, this is weird, this relationship that's going on between Trump and Vladimir Putin. But for the American public, this is about America. And if you're a real American, if you're a patriot, you support America. You support American values. You think your economy, stuff just pops up in Walmart? No, it has to be built somewhere, mainly in China, across the Pacific Ocean, or is built and supported. BMWs, Mercedes-Benzes are built in South Carolina, but a lot of the parts come from Germany and Switzerland, Austria, and all these things. The global trade that, by the way, America invented after World War II.
And protects to this day.
No one had refrigerators en masse until America built refrigerators out of the tanks they were building in World War II.
How many Russian refrigerators are you buying?
Right. I mean, I'm a tour leader of this group called Special Operations Expeditions, SOE Expeditions. I go to Egypt to go over the history of the Special Air Service and the Long Range Desert Group. Yeah. And one of the facts that pops up every time is the SAS relied on the LRDG, these old Chevy trucks, to go deep into the desert. Right. And in 1942, 200 Bantam Jeeps miraculously showed up in Egypt. Yeah. 200, not 20, not 12.
There's General
right? America. Yeah. Did I mention in boxes disassembled, and they could assemble them in a matter of 2 hours?
Well, I mean, the Russians like to crow about their World War II victory, but they drove to Berlin in Studebakers.
Right, in Studebakers.
You know? So what drives me nuts is that if we do abandon Ukraine, what message does that send to China, to Iran?
Go for it.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want. America is no longer a bulwark for democracy. As a matter of fact, they could support you. They could actually join you. And Donald Trump has mentioned that he is willing to raise sanctions on Iran, which is mind-boggling. Iran and Russia immediately if he becomes president.
It's, as I say, it couldn't be more essential. And I know that there are lots of folks that you're in touch with. Of course, normally I live in Kiev, and you have the Legion that you support and friends back in Ukraine. They're, of course, watching, with bated breath, because their fate, their future, relies on what American voters will do on the 5th.
The fate of 45 million people rests on America next Tuesday.
What message do you send to your Ukrainian friends and any Ukrainians in my audience who might be watching?
You got to have faith. You got to have faith. What's that old saying, Churchill? Says America will always do the wrong thing until it does the right thing.
Yeah.
Something along that lines.
Or you can always trust on America to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other alternatives.
And it's true. But what it means is America gets riled up and then common sense kicks in. And I'm just hoping that common sense kicks in and helps save Ukraine. Not just sustain it, but to advance it in such a way that they will win.
And then the other audience that I have is, there's a large American audience. We touched upon it at the beginning, but let's circle back to it as we kind of draw this conversation to a close. What do you, when it comes to this conflict in Ukraine, when it comes to Russia and their interference in our electorate and our body politic, when they go to the ballot, what would you say to Americans who are deciding how to vote on Tuesday?
It's as simple as this. First off, there's only one choice you can make here. One. And that is you are deciding simply between dictatorship. If you choose Donald Trump, you are choosing dictatorship. You're choosing tribalism. And that you are decided America must become a white supremacist dictatorship. That's what you're choosing. Or you are choosing the history of the United States, 248 years, sustaining 248 years of the American experiment. There is no in between. There's no gray space. If you don't vote, you are choosing dictatorship. If you don't actively get up, get you whoever you know to vote, to go out and vote for Kamala Harris. And look, there's a reason a third of the Republican Party is now supporting Harris, because they choose patriotism. They choose America over a dictator. They do not, look, we can all have disagreements on policy, but you cannot have a disagreement on whether you want a dictatorship or you want a democracy. So you choose. And if we go to democracy, I certainly hope that, you understand that voting for the, Tigers won't eat my face party means that the Tigers can eat your face too. Yeah. You cannot escape what is coming. If the economy crashes, because Donald Trump does something crazy, insane, like eliminate the income tax, and then the United States goes to a 40% VAT, value added tax, like in Europe. That's what a tariff is. It's a VAT. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. Everything's imported. If you go to Walmart, all of your prices will go up 40% immediately. Immediately. And the Chinese will make bank because you need to still buy their items.
And also
and then the economy crashes.
And also Moscow and the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin will be gleeful, because no matter,
it'll be the end of America.
Both Trump and Vance are their puppets, for lack of a better word, manipulated, or maybe they think common cause. But I assure you, having lived in Russia and studied, as a journalist, you as an intelligence officer and as a soldier, maybe I'm approaching it slightly different, but I look at it, they want nothing good for this country.
Nothing.
Russia wants the dissolution of not only the transatlantic alliance, but they want to see civil war. They're open discussions in many think tanks, and we find information from intelligence defectors and whatnot. Their intent is to destroy our union.
Yes.
Do you fear that might happen?
Yeah. We could be hours away from that. Hours. To where the United States will come apart at the seams if Donald Trump gets into office and J.D. Vance carry out their plot to contest the election and then
this is the other thing.
Seize power. It doesn't matter. Look, I always call attention to how deep the historical roots have in Russian destabilization. One of my favorite books was written by Robert Louis Stevenson, the guy who wrote Treasure Island.
Sure.
And no, not Robert Louis Stevenson, wrong guy. Joseph Conrad, who
wrote Heart of Darkness.
Well, he also wrote a book called The Spy. And The Spy is about a Russian plot in Tsarist Russia to destabilize the empire of Britain during the Great Game by paying anarchists to explode bombs around London. That was in the late 1870s.
Yeah.
It has always been in the Russian psyche to destabilize a foreign power through violence.
Yes.
And the United States, they figured out, we'll do violence against ourselves. All we need to do is manipulate your mindset. And when I wrote my book, Plot to Destroy America, Plot to Hack America, not Destroy America, Plot to Hack America, I said famously, what was hacked was not the Democratic National Committee. It was the mindset of the American public that there were hidden things that Hillary Clinton was hiding from us, and Donald Trump could save you from that. And it was all a Russian intelligence operation.
Because Russians it worked, and because Russians cynically believe that democracy is actually ineffectual. When
I wrote my book, Plot to Destroy Democracy, which was about Russian intelligence, and it came out, and it was doing well. It was number 6 on the New York Times bestsellers list. It was like Putin was reading my mind. And the next day after I made the Times bestseller list, he made a speech where he said, liberal democracy must be destroyed. Liberal democracy is the greatest plague that's going on up there. And I'm like, why don't you just write me a blurb for my front cover? You are saying precisely what I wrote, only he said it out loud because he believed,
and it's echoed.
He believed right-wing extremists in the West, not just in America, finally primed to start tearing down the American economy.
Yeah, sadly, I think that there are some who are so disillusioned by the American project because it isn't. It's for everybody.
Because it's fair.
It's fair, and it's for everybody now.
Don't want
There's
that.
a reason why every episode of this show I conclude with the quote by Abraham Lincoln, because these guys have always been with us, and they find common cause with this Russian autocracy and demagoguery and whatnot. Because democracy is difficult and sloppy. It's hard, and everybody has to participate.
You have to be fair.
And also, when it works best, everybody's included. These guys want only them to have power.
Absolutely.
That's what Trump's looking at, and it's very similar to what I saw happen.
Trump gave them the
Russia.
permission slip to be indecent,
to
be
cruel.
as cruel and mean and heartless, except amongst us. When I wrote and Plot to Destroy Democracy, I said Trump aspires for America to be a constitutional dictatorship, in which the Constitution is now a fig leaf, only applicable to members who are loyal to Donald Trump. You will get freedom of speech, you will get your right to bear arms, you'll get whatever if you're a white man and his family that supports Trump.
Right.
The rest of you, 65% you, will be ruled over with an iron fist. That old saw about Hitler won 33% of the electorate, convinced the other 33% of the electorate to eliminate the final 33% of the electorate. And that's where we are. We're looking at a guy who is a fascist. He is an autocrat. He is very Hitler-like. I believe J.D. Vance, when he was a liberal a couple of years ago, said Donald Trump aspires to be Hitler. And I don't think he aspires to be Hitler. I think he is a demented old man who aspires to be a dictator, because he is always, and I'm quoting General Kelly, right, as chief of staff of the White House, former Marine 4-star general. He aspires to be a fascist. He admires fascists, and he wants to be one. He does want everyone to stand up and clap for him in unison like Kim Jong-un.
And sadly, those who kind of follow him want the simplicity of a dictatorship, not knowing what that means. We both travel the world.
Yeah.
We've been in countries that are either dictatorships or are struggling to maintain or create democracy.
Right.
I don't think these people understand what it means.
They don't, because they haven't had their skin in the game. What's happening now is tribalism. The us tribe. The in tribe is white, male, evangelical, Christian, low education. That's the base. I just described his base. It's not racist. Freaking fact.
Yeah.
And they want to rule over everyone else. Rule over.
Yeah.
No longer participate in democracy. No longer have these discussions. No longer have to be fair. No longer have to be nice. No longer have to be anything but cruel and mean-spirited. And they feel that they also, and I said this on Real Time with Bill Maher in 2020, 4 days after the election, they were about to call the election. I told them, before the election, if they had won, they would view themselves as the self-deputized enforcers of Trump's will. They would go around on their trucks with their giant Trump flags and weapons, and will now say, we now rule this country, you don't. And I said, if they lose, they will go into an underground insurgency, paramilitary insurgency. 3, 2, 1, it happened. Just as I said it on air, right, they went into an insurgency. First political, with their little rebellion in the House of Representatives. Then paramilitary with their attack on the Capitol.
January 6th,
And now they're going to bring
we obviously, look, and we also can't abide by that.
No.
Those of us who are patriotic Americans, and by that I mean not just enveloping yourself in the Constitution or wrapping yourself in the flag, but the beliefs of America. Now more than ever, I believe this is an inflection point. And so I'm glad that you would come and talk to us about it right as we're on the cusp of the election.
This is the most dangerous week since 1860, since the beginning of this, since the dissolution of the United States and the Civil War.
Well, buddy, I appreciate the time, as I thought this was a great conversation, because these are really important things. So folks, when you go into that booth on Tuesday, or beforehand if you can, keep all of these things that Malcolm and I have spoken about. You do not want to go down the road of Russia. That is what Ukraine is fighting against.
Right.
with everything that they have, and we need to support it better, and I'm hoping that a Harris administration will do just that. But our fight is the same fight as the Ukrainians, and the sooner we recognize that, the better. You have your books out, Malcolm, which people can easily obtain. You've got Substack, you're on the Stump. Where can people tap into what it is?
The best place to go right now is take a subscription, free subscription or a paid subscription at Substack. It's malcolmnance.substack.com. And I gave what people are saying. I have like 50,000 followers. They're saying that the best article I wrote the other day called Kneel, Pray, Win. And it was a treatise about the George Washington statue at Washington Crossing National Cemetery, where my late wife is buried, of Washington praying for the nation before he did the attack on Trenton in Christmas 1776. Yeah. But he actually looks out over the cemetery and prays over all the lost service members. And I thought, we need to do what Washington's doing. We need to get on our knees and pray for this nation, and then go out to win to sustain what he started, which was a presidency that is not a king. All right. And so I wrote that on Substack. And here's my last book, They Want to Kill Americans, which is the subtitle is The Malicious, Terrorist, and Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency. And that book is still available. And it was a warning about what's coming and how many of these people do want civil war. They want it.
Well, they don't know what it is.
They love the idea of playing with their guns out loud.
Yeah, they've never seen a war.
No.
They don't know the reality of it.
No, not really.
And, Ukrainians are out there fighting on the front lines. Mm-hmm. Okay? They're bleeding, they're dying, cities are being bombed. But they're determined to get freedom and democracy. All you have to do is cast your ballot in the right way. Malcolm, always a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah. I am determined that this country will not go down the road of Russia, and that we will continue to be partners with Ukraine. Yeah. And hopefully we will push back against this autocracy.
Well, you know what I say to that, right? That's Slava Ukraini, Slava Ameriki.
God bless America. Thank you very much.